I was living in a rural area in Oklahoma with my mother at a small lake house, and I'm probably 10, 11 at this time. One night, I'm sleeping in my room when I randomly and abruptly wake up for no reason. This was not normal for me, and I felt very uneasy. The only sound I could hear was my mother snoring in the next room on the couch. I rolled over and tried to go back to sleep, but my need to use the bathroom was growing more urgent, so I grudgingly forced myself to head that way. The bathroom is on the other side of the house, around a corner and past the kitchen, and finally down a long hallway on the right. So after I made the trip and finished my business, I flipped off the light switch and started heading back to bed. That's when I heard the distinct click of the light switch, and I saw the glow of the bathroom light in the hallway. Terrified, I slowly turned around just to witness the light in the bathroom start clicking on and off. Click, 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 click. Finally, it shut completely off. In the dark of the hallway, my eyes began to make out a white shape near the end of the hall. It was around my size and crouched to the floor. At this point, I'm frozen to the spot as my mind begins realizing that no one else is home except for my mom and myself. Then the white shape began whispering in a quiet man's voice. "Help me. I'm lost." I remember wanting to scream for my mom, but I couldn't, and instead I barely said, "No," before this thing starts running at me on what sounded like all fours. I quickly ran through the kitchen and around the corner before running to my sleeping mother, shaking her awake. I remember saying, "It's coming, it's coming," and my mother's eyes going from dazed to alert in an instant. She asked me what was going on, and I saw her eyes look over my shoulder before she screamed. Remembering her scream still makes my blood run cold. Never had I heard pure terror like that in my life, even to this day. She grabs me by the arms and pulls me into my room and slams the door. She holds me in her arms with her back pressed against the door as we listen. It sounded like this thing was running around in circles in the kitchen. We could hear hands and feet slapping against the tile. The kitchen had a sliding glass door to the outside, which sounded like it was thrown open, then slammed. We sat there horrified until daybreak. I was sent to my grandmother's in the next town for a while after that, and never set foot in that house again. Years later, my mother said she went walking around the property after the incident and came across a small burial site with 3 headstones that each belonged to children from the early 1900s. It freaks me out because what I heard that night was a man's voice, but it was so unnatural. My mom still will not tell me what she saw behind me and what it was that made her scream. She tells me she's afraid it will know we're talking about it and it will come back.
So I'm crying as I type this, because what I just saw has got to be the single scariest shit that I've ever witnessed, and is the reason I'm moving out of the rural part of my state the first chance I get. So for some quick background, I live in rural Illinois and am a bit of a night owl, so I frequently will smoke in my garage late at night. Since I live in the country, I'm used to hearing noises around me like weird scratching and rubbing sort of noises, which I assume are just the rats and mice and stuff that come with living on a farm. Anyway, I usually act like a big chicken when it comes to walking back inside after these smokes at night, despite the fact that I'm very familiar with my yard and the area around it, and always end up sprinting back to the side door and slamming it behind me without looking back. Tonight I looked back. High and assuming that I was just being afraid of the dark, I looked around for about 15 to 20 seconds, which wounded up being a mistake, because I did see something. Out of the corner of my eye, peeking around the side of the garage that I had just walked from, stood the undeniable half-silhouette of a person shrouded in darkness. Now this sight alone was enough to make the tears in my eyes start flowing, and for me to fully shit my pants. But it got worse. In the shock of seeing someone where I was literally just walking away from with my back turned, I stood there for a moment with a horrified look on my face, trying to blink away the tears and hopefully the sight before me. The thing I saw must have recognized that I saw it, because the single worst thing I've ever witnessed after that happened. He took one step out past the corner of the garage and into the light of the side porch. Intentionally, I now think, because it wanted me to see its face. Standing there was a perfect replica of my father, but under the circumstances, I didn't consider it to actually be him for a second, because I knew him for a fact to be sleeping inside the house. And what happened next definitely solidified that, because in the 10-second span I had to process what I was seeing, he, the imposter, sideways walked out into the light and just stared right at me harder than I've ever been stared at in my entire life. When I say sideways walked, I don't mean like a karaoke stretch or a turn run, and then turned back toward me. It was as if the entire lower half of him shifted sideways, while the upper portion of him stared perfectly and inhumanly still, and focused on me. I didn't hesitate after that to sprint inside, shut off the light, and lock the door. I've been trying to convince myself that my mind is playing tricks on me for the last half hour in my room, except for the fact that I can distinctly hear something moving back and forth outside my window. I'm currently scared shitless in my bed under the covers, trying to make it through the night and telling myself that it's a weed hallucinations like they claim can happen. The absolute complete worst part is the fact that I can hear it testing out voices, trying to replicate my father's. It's hard to describe exactly what about it is so terrifying, but it's like hearing a bear or a moose speak English, but with a lack of human vocal cords. The closest thing I can compare it to is those videos of people who teach their cats to talk. It's out there pacing and practicing the phrase over and over. Son, it's me, can you give me a hand? Son, it's me, can you give me a hand? Sometimes more angry and booming, sometimes softly. The most chilling part that will be the reason I don't sleep tonight is the fact that I just heard it say, I know you're still awake. I'm from Connecticut. I was in a long-distance relationship with a girl from Georgia and would often make road trips down to visit her. I don't really mind. I love road trips. I've driven across the United States and back, all on my own. There's just something about traveling the highways of the US by yourself that's just so freeing. To save money, I would sleep in my car. It's not so bad. It's basically camping ... in a metal tent. Makes you feel like you're really roughing it. I just recline the seat back, keep the key in the ignition just in case, and doze off. No, I don't put anything up to block the windows for privacy. Maybe I should have. The trip down south is a comfortable 2-day drive. My stop would usually be somewhere along the Virginia-North Carolina border. So, for my previous trip, that's exactly where I stopped that night. Rest stops were often less trafficked and thus quieter than truck stops. Normally I would have stopped at a Love's, but I was so tired that I settled for the first rest stop I saw. It was oddly vacant that night, with only a couple lone cars sitting forlorn under the amber street lamps, most likely travelers with the same idea as myself. I pulled into a parking spot away from the others, under the shadow of a tree and far from the street lamps. I figured I would have more privacy there as opposed to being bathed in light. So I did my usual thing, locked my doors, opened the window just a hair for ventilation, kept my key in, reclined the seat, and went to sleep. I was never interrupted on any of these car camping nights, so I never suspected anything on this one. Then a sharp tap woke me up. At first, I thought I had heard it in my dream. I opened my eyes a bit confused. Since I was leaned back, I was facing the ceiling and couldn't see anything. I hear another tap. Like a tiny object hitting a hard surface. It came in an irregular rhythm. Was it raining? Was water dripping onto my windshield? I'm under a tree. Maybe something fell from the branches. Maybe a squirrel or a bird was dropped something. What if a squirrel was climbing around my car? Or what if it wasn't an animal? The thought occurred to me that it might very well be a person poking around outside. What did they want? Were the doors locked? Yes. The keys were in the ignition. I can leave in an instant. Still, I lay there completely still, pretending to be asleep. Pretending I hadn't heard anything. Hoping whoever it was, they would leave me alone. It was better to not find out. I was too afraid to find out. It was better to stay here in blissful ignorance. Still, the tapping continued. I had to do something. There was no way I was just going to stay there. I had to look. My heart was pounding. In that moment, it was deafeningly loud. Whoever was out there could probably hear it. I decided I was going to look. I was going to raise my head up and see what was making the noise. So that's what I did. What met my eyes sent a jolt through entire body. Every muscle fiber locked up in pure shock at what I saw. The faint glow of the street lamps cast just enough light for me to make out what I was looking at. There in the windshield, staring directly at me, was a face. Someone, I presumed to be a woman, was lying on my hood, her face pressed right up against my windshield. Her face was completely still, locked in a permanent grin. I froze in overwhelming terror. The eyes I stared into appeared to have rolled back, showing only the whites. The nose was turned up, pressed painfully into the glass. The lips stretched wide, revealing horrid, rotten teeth. Even in the darkness, I could tell her skin was sickly pale, contrasting her long, filthy black hair. Whoever this was, she was clearly not in her right mind. I don't know how long I sat there, too afraid to move. Finally, I got a grip on myself and shot my hand to the ignition. It turned over, making in that instant the most beautiful sound I ever heard. For a split second, I was afraid I might be caught in a horror movie scenario, the one where the car won't crank as the killer approaches. I reversed as fast as I could, trying not to give this creeper time to try anything. In my panic, I remember activating the windshield wipers in a futile attempt to get her off. I thought, was I about to drive out of here with some wacko holding onto my hood? Thankfully, I didn't have to worry about that, because as soon as I stopped, the woman leapt off, landing on all fours. Seeing my opportunity, I shifted into drive and gunned it, right as I saw her reaching for the driver's side door. With my foot on the gas, I sped out of the parking lot. Behind me, I heard her let out a piercing shriek like that of an animal. I looked in my rearview mirror, and for a split second I thought I saw her chasing me, running on all fours, her black hair swinging wildly around her. I merged onto the highway, picked up speed, and drove through the night without stopping until morning.